Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Robert Bobby Kellerman had built his empire on two principles: absolute loyalty and merciless retribution for those who crossed him. At 45, he owned a chain of high-end security firms across the Pacific Northwest, employing former military and law enforcement personnel who understood the value of discretion and unwavering allegiance. His corner office overlooked the Seattle waterfront, where gray clouds perpetually threatened rain. Bobby's steel blue eyes reflected the same stormy intensity as he reviewed personnel files, his weathered hands bearing scars from his younger days as a Marine Corps reconnaissance specialist. Those days had taught him that survival meant never showing weakness and never trusting blindly. 20 years ago, he'd met Diane Walsh at a veterans charity gala. She was a trauma nurse with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to hold genuine compassion. Unlike the women who typically gravitated toward his growing wealth, Diane appeared unimpressed by his material success. She challenged his cynical worldview, suggesting that not everyone harbored ulterior motives. Their courtship was a careful dance. Bobby's father, Frank Kellerman, had warned him about trusting too easily. Frank, a retired police detective, had seen enough human nature to know that people's masks eventually slipped. But Diane's consistency over months, then years, slowly eroded Bobby's defenses. They married in a small ceremony, with Bobby's business partner and childhood friend, Miguel Santos, serving as best man. Connor was born 2 years later, a son who inherited Bobby's sharp intelligence and Diane's warm smile. For the first time in his life, Bobby allowed himself to believe in something beyond his control. Diane seamlessly integrated into his world, hosting dinner parties for his clients and building relationships with the wives of his business associates. She never questioned his long hours or the occasional unexplained injuries he returned home with. Their Bellevue mansion became a sanctuary where Bobby could shed his armor and simply be a husband and father. Connor grew into a bright, athletic teenager who excelled in academics and lacrosse. Bobby saw himself in the boy's competitive spirit but was grateful for Diane's tempering influence, which prevented Connor from developing the same ruthless edge that defined Bobby's business dealings. The family's Friday night tradition involved dinner at Salvatore's, an Italian restaurant where the owner, Vincent Torino, had become a close friend. These evenings represented everything Bobby had fought to build: stability, loyalty, and the illusion of normalcy that money couldn't purchase. Trevor Maddox entered their lives 18 months ago as Connor's new lacrosse coach at Eastside Preparatory Academy. At 38, Trevor possessed the kind of effortless charm that made him instantly likable. His background as a former college athlete turned high school coach suggested dedication to youth development, which initially impressed Bobby. Trevor's integration into their social circle seemed natural. He attended school fundraisers where Diane volunteered, joined parent-coach dinners, and even accepted Bobby's invitation to a Seahawks game. His easy laugh and apparent devotion to his students masked whatever calculating mind operated beneath his friendly exterior. What Bobby didn't initially recognize was Trevor's talent for reading people and identifying their vulnerabilities. Trevor had perfected the art of becoming indispensable, offering emotional support precisely when it was most needed. He positioned himself as the understanding friend who listened without judgment, especially to women feeling neglected by their high-achieving husbands. Diane's involvement with the school's fundraising committee provided Trevor with numerous opportunities for private conversations. Their interactions began innocuously enough: discussions about Connor's potential, strategies for college recruitment, and eventually more personal topics about marriage, dreams, and disappointments. Bobby's security business demanded extensive travel, often leaving Diane alone for days at a time. These absences, once filled with her nursing career and volunteer work, began to feel like voids that Trevor gradually filled with his presence and attention. The transformation was subtle but measurable. Diane started mentioning Trevor more frequently in conversation, quoting his opinions on everything from education reform to relationship dynamics. She began attending every lacrosse practice and game, her enthusiasm seemingly focused on Connor's development but increasingly centered on his coach's approval. Bobby's trained eye for behavioral changes should have detected the shift earlier, but his faith in Diane's loyalty created a blind spot in his otherwise perfect situational awareness. The woman who had earned his trust through years of consistency was slowly becoming someone else entirely, influenced by a man who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities. Connor, caught between his admiration for his coach and his unconscious awareness of changing family dynamics, began displaying subtle signs of stress. His grades remained high, but his interactions with Bobby became more guarded, as if he were protecting secrets he didn't fully understand. The foundation Bobby had spent 20 years building was developing cracks that would soon become fault lines, threatening to destroy everything he held sacred. But the predator who had survived combat zones and corporate warfare remained unaware that his own home had become a battlefield where his enemies were the faces of those he loved most. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Bobby's revelation came not through suspicious behavior or incriminating evidence, but through the methodical application of skills that had kept him alive in hostile territories. His security firm's latest contract involved investigating corporate espionage for a Fortune 500 client, requiring him to employ surveillance techniques that had become second nature. The irony wasn't lost on him when he decided to test a new tracking system by placing it in Diane's car, ostensibly to ensure her safety during her volunteer work in less secure neighborhoods. The device, no larger than a matchbox, transmitted real-time location data to his encrypted phone application. For 3 weeks, the tracker confirmed Bobby's expectations. Diane's movements followed predictable patterns between home, the hospital where she maintained part-time hours, and Connor's school. Her routine never deviated, reinforcing Bobby's confidence in his wife's reliability and predictability. The first anomaly occurred on a Thursday afternoon when Diane's location showed her at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel instead of her claimed destination of a fundraising committee meeting at the school. Bobby's initial assumption was that the committee had relocated their venue, but a quick call to the school's administrative office revealed no scheduled meetings that day. Bobby's combat experience had taught him to trust his instincts while gathering more intelligence before acting. He began paying closer attention to Diane's behavior, noting small changes that his subconscious had registered but his conscious mind had dismissed. She'd become more conscious of her appearance, investing in new lingerie that never appeared in their bedroom. Her phone, once casually left around the house, now accompanied her everywhere, often face down on surfaces. The second hotel visit occurred the following Tuesday, lasting exactly 90 minutes. Bobby's surveillance training enabled him to observe Diane's pre-departure routine with clinical detachment. She showered longer, selected her clothing more carefully, and applied makeup with the precision of someone preparing for an important encounter. Miguel Santos had been Bobby's closest friend since their military service together, and their business partnership was built on absolute honesty. When Bobby shared his suspicions, Miguel offered to conduct discreet surveillance, understanding that Bobby needed definitive proof before taking action. Miguel's surveillance confirmed Bobby's worst fears while revealing the devastating scope of the betrayal. The third-floor hotel room was registered under Trevor Maddox's name, and their interactions displayed the comfortable intimacy of an established relationship rather than a spontaneous affair. The photographs Miguel captured showed Diane's transformed personality, laughing with an abandon Bobby hadn't witnessed in years, touching Trevor with casual familiarity, and displaying an emotional openness that she'd gradually withdrawn from her marriage. These weren't the actions of a woman making a terrible mistake, but someone who had found what she believed was missing in her life. Connor's involvement became apparent when Miguel's surveillance extended to Trevor's other activities. The boy was spending increasing amounts of time with his coach outside official practice hours, participating in advanced training sessions that seemed designed more to facilitate private conversations between Trevor and Diane than improve Connor's athletic performance. Bobby's most painful discovery came through Connor's unwitting betrayal during what should have been a routine father-son conversation about college planning. Connor mentioned that Coach Maddox had offered to write recommendation letters and had extensive connections with university athletic programs. The boy's enthusiasm for these opportunities revealed that Trevor had positioned himself as Connor's primary mentor and advocate. The psychological manipulation was masterful in its simplicity. Trevor had convinced Diane that Bobby's emotional unavailability was damaging their marriage, while simultaneously persuading Connor that his father's demanding nature was limiting his potential. Both believed they were protecting Bobby from painful truths while secretly planning their future with the man who truly understood their needs. Bobby's military background had exposed him to sophisticated psychological operations, but experiencing such manipulation directed at his family triggered a cold rage that transcended personal hurt. This wasn't just adultery. It was a calculated assault on everything he'd built, orchestrated by someone who had studied his vulnerabilities and exploited them with surgical precision. The final piece of evidence came from Bobby's own security system. His home office contained encrypted files related to his most sensitive business dealings, protected by biometric locks and surveillance cameras. Recent access logs showed that someone with knowledge of his security protocols had attempted to breach his files during his absence. Diane's nursing background had given her familiarity with security systems, and Trevor's questions about Bobby's work had seemed like innocent curiosity from someone impressed by his success. Together, they had been gathering information that could potentially destroy Bobby's business and reputation if shared with competitors or law enforcement. Bobby realized he wasn't just dealing with an unfaithful wife and her lover. He was confronting enemies who had infiltrated his most protected spaces and were systematically dismantling his life from within. The betrayal was complete, involving his wife, his son, and potentially his livelihood. The man who had never shown mercy to enemies in war zones or boardrooms now faced his greatest challenge, destroying those he loved most before they could finish destroying him. Bobby's transformation from betrayed husband to calculating predator was instantaneous and irreversible, guided by principles that had never failed him in combat. Chapter 3: The Architect of Destruction. Bobby's response to betrayal followed the same methodical approach that had made him successful in both military operations and business ventures. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford. This situation required the calculated precision of a surgical strike designed to eliminate threats permanently. His first priority was gathering complete intelligence on his enemy's capabilities, motivations, and vulnerabilities. Bobby had learned long ago that successful operations required understanding not just what people did, but why they did it and how far they were willing to go to achieve their objectives. Trevor Maddox's background investigation revealed a pattern that should have triggered Bobby's alarm systems earlier. Trevor's employment history showed a series of positions at elite private schools, each lasting approximately 2 years before he moved to new institutions. Reference checks with former employers yielded carefully neutral responses that suggested problems without providing specific details. Bobby's contacts in law enforcement provided off-the-record information about Trevor's previous relationships. 2 former colleagues had filed harassment complaints that were settled quietly, and there were rumors of inappropriate relationships with parents of students he coached. Trevor's pattern was consistent: identify lonely, wealthy women with successful husbands, provide emotional support and physical attention, then extract maximum benefit before moving to new hunting grounds. Diane's involvement was more complex than simple seduction. Her nursing career had stagnated after Connor's birth, and her volunteer work, while meaningful, lacked the professional recognition she'd once enjoyed. Trevor had identified her need for validation and intellectual stimulation, positioning himself as someone who appreciated her intelligence and capabilities in ways Bobby allegedly failed to recognize. Connor's manipulation was perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Trevor's strategy. The coach had convinced the boy that his father's expectations were unrealistic and potentially harmful to his development. Trevor presented himself as the mentor who would help Connor achieve his goals without the emotional pressure Bobby's demanding nature created. Bobby's business investigation revealed Trevor's ultimate objective: access to Bobby's client database and security protocols. Trevor had been carefully gathering information about Bobby's most vulnerable clients, including several who operated in legal gray areas and couldn't afford public exposure of their security arrangements. The revelation transformed Bobby's understanding of the situation. This wasn't a crime of passion or even opportunistic exploitation. It was a carefully planned operation designed to destroy his business, his family, and potentially his freedom if Trevor chose to share certain information with law enforcement. Bobby's response required equal sophistication and considerably more ruthlessness. His military experience had taught him that the most effective attacks appeared to come from the enemy's own actions rather than external forces. Trevor had made himself vulnerable by becoming emotionally invested in his manipulation of Diane and Connor, creating weaknesses that Bobby could exploit. The first phase of Bobby's counterattack focused on isolating Trevor from his support systems. Bobby's contacts in private education networks began circulating carefully crafted concerns about Trevor's coaching methods and professional boundaries. These weren't false accusations, but strategic discussions of behavioral patterns that encouraged closer scrutiny of Trevor's activities. Simultaneously, Bobby began documenting every aspect of Trevor and Diane's relationship, using surveillance techniques that would provide legal protection if the situation escalated to criminal proceedings. His security firm's resources enabled him to gather evidence without leaving traces that could be attributed to his personal involvement. Bobby's psychological campaign against Trevor involved systematic disruption of the coach's routine and gradually increasing his paranoia. Minor equipment failures during lacrosse practices, parking tickets for violations Trevor hadn't committed, and subtle changes to his living environment created a pattern of inexplicable problems that made Trevor question his own competence and stability. The manipulation of Connor required more delicate handling. Bobby began subtly questioning Trevor's advice and motivations, not through direct criticism, but by asking thoughtful questions that encouraged Connor to examine the coach's recommendations more critically. Bobby's superior knowledge of college athletics and recruitment processes gradually revealed gaps in Trevor's expertise that undermined the boy's confidence in his mentor. Diane's psychological profile suggested she would respond most strongly to evidence of Trevor's deception rather than attempts to win her back through improved behavior. Bobby began planting seeds of doubt about Trevor's genuine feelings and long-term intentions, using information from Trevor's past relationships to suggest patterns that Diane would eventually recognize. The most crucial element of Bobby's strategy involved manipulating the timeline of revelations. Rather than exposing the affair immediately, he needed Trevor and Diane to believe they were succeeding in their deception while actually providing Bobby with increasingly damaging evidence of their betrayal. Bobby's father, Frank, had always been his most trusted advisor, and the old detective's experience with human nature provided valuable insights into the psychological warfare Bobby was conducting. Frank's contacts in law enforcement also proved useful for gathering background information and ensuring that Bobby's eventual response would fall within legal boundaries. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Bobby. He was using the same skills that had made him successful in protecting others to orchestrate the destruction of those who had betrayed him. The difference was that this time, he felt no obligation to show mercy or consider the collateral damage his actions might cause. Bobby's transformation was complete by the end of the third week. The loving husband and father had been replaced by a predator who understood that survival required eliminating threats permanently and completely. Trevor and Diane had awakened something in Bobby that they were completely unprepared to face. A man with unlimited resources, dangerous skills, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Chapter 4: The Web Titans. Bobby's campaign entered its most delicate phase as he began orchestrating events that would force his enemies to reveal their true intentions while positioning himself for maximum advantage. His strategy required Trevor and Diane to believe they were making progress toward their goals while actually walking deeper into a trap that would destroy them completely. The first major manipulation involved Connor's college recruitment process. Bobby had maintained extensive contacts in university athletic programs through his security work, and several Division I lacrosse coaches owed him favors for protecting their programs from various scandals. Bobby arranged for Connor to receive preliminary interest from prestigious universities, but structured the opportunities to require Trevor's direct involvement as the primary contact. Trevor's eagerness to position himself as Connor's exclusive advocate led him to make promises he couldn't fulfill and claims about his influence that were demonstrably false. Bobby documented every exaggeration and false statement, creating a comprehensive record of Trevor's deception that would eventually be shared with Connor at the optimal moment. Diane's increasing emotional investment in Trevor made her vulnerable to manipulation through carefully orchestrated stress events. Bobby arranged for her hospital schedule to become more demanding, requiring longer hours and more difficult cases. Her supervisor, unaware of Bobby's involvement, believed the increased workload was necessary due to staffing shortages. The additional stress made Diane more dependent on Trevor's emotional support, while simultaneously reducing the time they could spend together. Bobby monitored their communications through sophisticated surveillance equipment that tracked their phone calls and text messages without leaving digital fingerprints. Trevor's growing paranoia about his unexplained problems led him to make increasingly desperate attempts to accelerate his timeline. He began pressuring Diane to consider leaving Bobby sooner than their original plan, using Connor's college preparation as justification for immediate action. Bobby's psychological profile of Trevor had identified narcissism and impatience as his primary weaknesses. The surveillance revealed that Trevor was simultaneously maintaining relationships with two other women, including a wealthy divorce attorney's wife in Portland. This information provided Bobby with leverage that could destroy Trevor's relationship with Diane while eliminating his ability to seek refuge with alternative partners. The second phase of Bobby's strategy involved introducing external pressures that would force Trevor to reveal his true priorities. Bobby arranged for Trevor's position at Eastside Preparatory Academy to come under review through anonymous complaints about his teaching methods and professional conduct. The investigation wasn't designed to immediately terminate Trevor's employment, but to create enough uncertainty about his future that he would need to secure financial resources quickly. Bobby predicted that Trevor would accelerate his attempts to gain access to Bobby's business assets, creating evidence of criminal intent that could be used to destroy him legally. Connor's gradual disillusionment with Trevor began when the promised college recruitment opportunities failed to materialize as described. Bobby ensured that Connor was present when university coaches contacted him directly, bypassing Trevor entirely and making it clear that the coaches' claimed influence was fictional. The boy's growing awareness of Trevor's deception created internal conflict between his loyalty to his mentor and his recognition of his father's genuine accomplishments. Bobby carefully nurtured this conflict without appearing to criticize Trevor directly, allowing Connor to reach his own conclusions about the coach's reliability and motivations. Diane's increasing stress and Trevor's growing desperation led to more frequent arguments between them, which Bobby monitored through audio surveillance in Trevor's apartment. Their conversations revealed the extent of their plans to destroy Bobby's business and their willingness to manipulate Connor for their own benefit. The most damaging revelation came when Trevor suggested that they could use Connor's college applications to force Bobby into a financial settlement that would benefit all of them. Trevor's casual willingness to exploit Connor's future demonstrated that his apparent mentorship was entirely transactional, designed to maximize his own benefit rather than help the boy succeed. Bobby's documentation of these conversations provided him with evidence of conspiracy and extortion that could result in serious criminal charges. More importantly, the recordings would serve as undeniable proof of Trevor and Diane's true motivations when Bobby chose to reveal them to Connor. Frank Kellerman's investigation into Trevor's financial situation revealed massive credit card debt and a history of living beyond his means. Trevor's expensive lifestyle was maintained through manipulation of wealthy women, and his current situation was desperate enough that he might resort to more extreme measures if his relationship with Diane didn't provide sufficient resources. The information about Trevor's financial desperation allowed Bobby to predict his next moves with greater accuracy. Trevor would need to either gain access to Bobby's assets quickly or eliminate Bobby as an obstacle to his relationship with Diane. Either choice would provide Bobby with justification for the final phase of his plan. Bobby's business partners, particularly Miguel Santos, had been monitoring potential threats to their operations without knowing the personal nature of Bobby's situation. Their security protocols detected unusual interest in their client database and financial records, confirming Bobby's suspicions about Trevor's ultimate objectives. The convergence of all these factors created the perfect storm that Bobby had been orchestrating. Trevor was facing professional destruction, financial ruin, and the loss of his relationship with Diane unless he took desperate action. Diane was emotionally exhausted and increasingly dependent on a man whose promises were proving false. Connor was beginning to question everything he'd been told about his father and his future prospects. Bobby had positioned himself as the only person with the resources and knowledge to resolve everyone's problems, while ensuring that any resolution would require the complete destruction of those who had betrayed him. The trap was set, and his enemies were walking into it with their eyes wide open. believing they were finally taking control of their destiny. Chapter 5. The Pressure Builds. Frank Kellerman's death came with devastating suddenness, a massive heart attack that struck him down in his own driveway while returning from his morning walk. For Bobby, losing his father meant more than personal grief. It meant losing his most trusted advisor and the one person who had understood the true scope of the psychological warfare he was conducting. The funeral arrangements provided Bobby with the perfect opportunity to orchestrate the final confrontation with his enemies. Frank's prominence in the law enforcement community meant the service would be well attended, creating a public venue where Trevor and Diane would be forced to maintain appearances while Bobby executed his endgame. Trevor's desperation had reached critical levels following the failure of his promised college recruitment connections and the ongoing investigation at his school. His financial situation was becoming untenable, and his relationship with Diane was strained by the increasing pressure of maintaining their deception while planning their future together. Diane's emotional state was equally fragile, torn between guilt over her betrayal of Bobby and fear that Trevor's promises might prove as false as Connor's recruitment opportunities had. Her grief over Frank's death was complicated by knowledge that Bobby would need her support during this difficult time, making her feel like a traitor for planning to abandon him. Connor's relationship with Trevor had deteriorated significantly once the boy realized that most of the coach's claims about college opportunities were exaggerated or completely false. The teenager's natural intelligence and his father's subtle guidance had led him to understand that Trevor had been manipulating him to gain access to his family. Bobby's surveillance had captured Trevor and Diane's increasingly desperate conversations about their timeline for leaving. Trevor was pressuring Diane to take action immediately after Frank's funeral, claiming that Bobby's emotional vulnerability would make him less likely to pursue legal action against them. The most damaging conversation occurred 3 days before the funeral, when Trevor suggested that they could claim Bobby had been physically abusive, providing justification for Diane's departure and potentially giving them access to a larger financial settlement. Diane's initial resistance to this suggestion revealed that she retained some loyalty to Bobby, but Trevor's persistence suggested he would eventually convince her to participate in this deception. Bobby's legal team had been preparing for multiple scenarios, including the possibility that Diane and Trevor might attempt to frame him for domestic violence or financial impropriety. His extensive documentation of their affair and Trevor's manipulation would serve as powerful counter-evidence, but Bobby preferred to resolve the situation without involving law enforcement if possible. The funeral preparations provided cover for Bobby to implement the final elements of his plan. His security firm's resources enabled him to control every aspect of the event, from the audiovisual systems that would be used for Frank's memorial presentations to the catering staff who would serve the reception. Miguel Santos had coordinated with Bobby's other business partners to ensure that key witnesses would be present for the confrontation. These individuals had been briefed on the general situation without being given specific details about Bobby's plans, ensuring they could provide credible testimony about subsequent events. Connor's emotional state was Bobby's primary concern as the funeral approached. The boy was grieving his grandfather while simultaneously processing his disillusionment with Trevor and growing awareness of his mother's betrayal. Bobby knew that Connor would be psychologically vulnerable during the funeral, making it crucial to handle the revelation of family secrets with maximum care. Bobby's strategy for the funeral required precise timing and psychological manipulation that would force Trevor and Diane to reveal their true intentions in front of witnesses who could validate Bobby's response. The setting needed to appear natural while actually being completely controlled, ensuring that Bobby maintained the moral high ground throughout the confrontation. The reading of Frank's will provided the perfect opportunity for Bobby's revelations. Frank had been aware of his son's marital problems and had structured his will to include provisions that would expose the true nature of Diane and Trevor's relationship while protecting Connor's interests. Frank's bequest to Connor included a college trust fund that could only be accessed through Bobby's exclusive control, eliminating Trevor's ability to use the boy's education as leverage in any financial negotiations. The will also included specific provisions that would invalidate Diane's inheritance claims if she was found to be involved in adultery or conspiracy against the family. Bobby's modification of his father's final wishes weren't forgeries. They were legitimate additions that Frank had agreed to make after learning about Diane's affair. The old detective's experience with criminal behavior had led him to understand the importance of protecting his family's assets from those who might attempt to exploit Bobby's emotional vulnerability. The funeral day arrived with the weight of accumulated tension that had been building for months. Every participant understood that significant changes were imminent, but only Bobby knew exactly how those changes would unfold. Trevor and Diane believed they were attending a funeral that would provide them with their final opportunity to execute their plans. Connor was struggling with conflicting loyalties and growing awareness that his family was fragmenting. Bobby was prepared to destroy everyone who had betrayed him while protecting the only relationship that remained salvageable. The morning of the funeral, Bobby reviewed his strategy one final time, ensuring that every element was positioned correctly for maximum impact. His enemies had walked willingly into his trap, believing they were finally taking control of their destiny. Within hours, they would understand the true cost of betraying a man who had never shown mercy to those who crossed him. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The morning of Frank Kellerman's funeral dawned gray and cold, matching the somber mood that hung over the Kellerman household. Bobby moved through his preparations with military precision, each action calculated to project the image of a grieving son while concealing the predator lurking beneath the surface. Connor had barely spoken to anyone for the past 2 days, his usual confidence replaced by a haunting awareness that his family was disintegrating around him. The boys' attempts to maintain normalcy were heartbreaking to observe, but Bobby knew that temporary pain was necessary to save Connor from the deeper damage that Trevor and Diane's manipulation would ultimately cause. Diane's behavior revealed the internal conflict consuming her. She moved between displays of supportive grief and barely concealed anxiety about the confrontation she knew was coming. Her communications with Trevor had become increasingly frantic as the funeral approached, with the coach pressuring her to use the family's emotional vulnerability to accelerate their timeline. Trevor's desperation had reached dangerous levels. His position at Eastside Preparatory Academy was being terminated due to the ongoing investigation, and his financial situation was approaching complete collapse. The funeral represented his last opportunity to salvage something from his relationship with Diane before being forced to flee to avoid his creditors. Bobby's surveillance had captured Trevor's most revealing conversation with his contact in Portland, a divorce attorney's wife who had been providing him with legal advice about extracting maximum financial benefit from his relationship with Diane. Trevor's casual discussion of false domestic violence allegations and financial manipulation demonstrated his complete willingness to destroy Bobby's reputation and freedom to achieve his goals. The funeral service was held at St. Mark's Cathedral, a venue that Frank had chosen specifically for its capacity to accommodate the hundreds of law enforcement officers, security professionals, and community leaders who would attend. Bobby's selection of this location ensured that any confrontation would occur in front of witnesses whose credibility couldn't be questioned. Miguel Santos had coordinated with Bobby's security team to position themselves throughout the cathedral, ready to document and intervene if Trevor or Diane attempted to create a disturbance. Their presence was disguised as standard security measures for a high-profile funeral, but their real purpose was to ensure that Bobby maintained complete control over the situation. The service proceeded according to plan, with Bobby delivering a eulogy that honored his father's memory while subtly reinforcing the values of loyalty and justice that had guided Frank's life. Bobby's words carried deeper meaning for those who understood the family's current crisis, particularly his emphasis on the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Connor's reaction to the eulogy revealed his growing understanding of the situation. The boy's tears weren't just grief for his grandfather, but recognition that his family's foundation was crumbling and that difficult choices lay ahead. Bobby's heart broke watching his son's pain, but he knew that short-term suffering was preferable to the long-term damage that Trevor's continued influence would cause. Diane's emotional state became increasingly unstable as the service progressed. Her guilt over betraying Bobby was amplified by the public display of support from Frank's friends and colleagues, many of whom had known her for years and considered her part of their extended family. The weight of her deception was becoming unbearable, but Trevor's presence in the congregation served as a constant reminder of her commitment to their plan. The transition to the reception provided Bobby with the opportunity to implement the final phase of his strategy. The community center adjacent to the cathedral had been prepared according to his specifications, with audiovisual equipment that would enable him to present evidence of Trevor and Diane's betrayal to the assembled guests. Bobby's legal team had positioned themselves strategically throughout the reception, ready to document any admissions or threats that Trevor or Diane might make during the confrontation. Their presence was disguised as grief counselors and family friends, but their real purpose was to ensure that any criminal behavior was properly witnessed and recorded. Trevor's impatience finally overcame his caution during the early stages of the reception. His whispered conversation with Diane near the memorial display revealed his intention to confront Bobby directly about their future plans, believing that the public setting would prevent Bobby from responding aggressively. Bobby's observation of this conversation confirmed that his enemies were ready to reveal their true intentions. Trevor's arrogance had convinced him that Bobby was too emotionally compromised to mount an effective defense, while Diane's guilt made her eager to end the deception regardless of the consequences. The reading of Frank's will was scheduled to occur after the reception, but Bobby decided to accelerate his timeline based on Trevor's apparent readiness for confrontation. His signal to Miguel Santos initiated a series of actions that would bring all the participants together for the final revelation. Connor's position during these events was crucial to Bobby's strategy. The boy needed to witness his mother and Trevor's betrayal directly, ensuring that he understood the true nature of their relationship and the threat they posed to his future. Bobby's protection of Connor required destroying the boy's illusions about his mother, a sacrifice that would cause immediate pain but prevent greater damage later. The announcement that Frank's will would be read immediately gathered all the key participants in the cathedral's adjacent conference room. The setting was perfect for Bobby's purposes, intimate enough for personal confrontation, but public enough to ensure proper documentation of subsequent events. Bobby's enemies believed they were finally seizing control of their destiny, unaware that they were actually walking into the culmination of a trap that had been months in the making. Within minutes, their carefully constructed deceptions would be exposed, their future plans would be destroyed, and their lives would be forever changed by the consequences of betraying a man who had never shown mercy to those who crossed him. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the immediate future of the Kellerman family, but the ultimate fate of everyone who had participated in the conspiracy against Bobby. His transformation from grieving son to calculating predator was complete, and his enemies were about to discover the true cost of their betrayal. Chapter 7. The Will Reading. The conference room adjacent to St. Mark's Cathedral felt smaller than its actual dimensions as the key participants gathered for Frank Kellerman's will reading. Bobby had orchestrated the guest list with surgical precision. Family members, close friends, his business partners, and select law enforcement colleagues who had worked with Frank over the decades. Connor sat beside his father, his face pale with exhaustion and confusion. The teenager's usual confidence had been replaced by a haunting awareness that his world was about to change forever. His eyes darted between his mother and Trevor, the growing distance between his parents finally impossible to ignore. Diane occupied a chair near the back of the room, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a tissue. Her positioning allowed her to maintain visual contact with Trevor while appearing to support Bobby during this difficult time. Her internal conflict was visible to anyone trained to read body language, torn between guilt over her betrayal and commitment to the plan she and Trevor had developed. Trevor stood against the wall near the room's entrance, his athletic frame tense with barely contained anticipation. His presence at such an intimate family gathering would have been questionable under normal circumstances, but his role as Connor's coach provided sufficient justification. His eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloging potential obstacles and escape routes with the instincts of someone accustomed to operating on the edge of legitimacy. Margaret Walsh, Frank's longtime attorney, had been briefed by Bobby about the family situation without being given specific details about his plans. Her role was to read the will exactly as written, allowing the document's provisions to speak for themselves. The elderly woman's decades of experience with family disputes had taught her to remain neutral regardless of the drama that might unfold. Bobby's business partners were strategically positioned throughout the room, their presence appearing natural given their close relationship with the family. Miguel Santos sat near the front, ready to document any significant reactions or statements. The others had been instructed to observe without interfering unless the situation became physically dangerous. The reading began with standard bequests to various charities and longtime employees, creating a sense of normalcy that masked the explosive revelations to come. Frank's methodical approach to his final wishes reflected his career-long attention to detail and his understanding of the psychological impact of properly timed revelations. Connor's inheritance was announced first among the family bequests, a substantial college trust fund that would ensure his education at any institution he chose. The provision that caught everyone's attention was Frank's specification that the trust could only be accessed through Bobby's exclusive control, effectively eliminating any possibility that Connor's education could be used as leverage in divorce proceedings. Diane's bequest was announced next, but with a qualification that caused her to sit forward in her chair. Frank's provision included a substantial monetary gift, but only if Diane remained married to Bobby and hadn't engaged in any activities that would constitute grounds for divorce under Washington state law. The specific mention of adultery and conspiracy caused her face to drain of color. Trevor's reaction to this announcement was immediate and revealing. His casual stance against the wall shifted to rigid attention as he realized that Frank's will had been structured to protect the family's assets from exactly the type of manipulation he and Diane had been planning. His eyes met Diane's across the room, and their exchange conveyed volumes about their shared understanding of the implications. Bobby's inheritance constituted the majority of Frank's estate, including his home, investments, and personal effects. But the most significant provision was Frank's transfer of certain documents and evidence that he had been collecting regarding threats to his family's security and well-being. The attorney's reading of this section was deliberately vague, but its meaning was clear to those who understood the situation. Connor's confusion was evident as he processed the will's provisions. His grandfather's references to protecting the family from internal and external threats suggested knowledge of problems that Connor was only beginning to understand. The boy's glances between his parents revealed his growing awareness that their marriage was in serious trouble. The reading concluded with Frank's personal message to his family, recorded shortly before his death and played through the room's audio system. His voice, weakened by age but strong with conviction, delivered a final warning about the importance of loyalty and the consequences faced by those who betrayed family trust. Frank's message included specific references to recent events that had caused him concern, including attempts by unnamed individuals to access sensitive family information and manipulate family relationships for personal gain. His words carried the weight of a lifetime of law enforcement experience and his deep understanding of criminal behavior patterns. The impact of Frank's final message on Diane was devastating. Her composure finally cracked as she realized that Frank had known about her affair and had structured his will specifically to protect Bobby and Connor from her betrayal. Her quiet sobs drew attention from throughout the room, but also confirmed suspicions that several attendees had been harboring. Trevor's reaction was more controlled but equally revealing. His position near the door suggested preparation for a quick exit, and his facial expression had shifted from anticipation to barely concealed anger. The realization that Frank had outmaneuvered him posthumously was clearly infuriating, but his next actions would determine whether he chose flight or fight. Margaret Walsh concluded the formal reading by announcing that certain sealed documents would be distributed privately to relevant parties, as specified in Frank's instructions. These documents contained the evidence that Frank had been collecting about Trevor and Diane's relationship, providing Bobby with legal protection for whatever actions he chose to take. The silence that followed the reading was heavy with unspoken tensions and barely contained emotions. Every person in the room understood that they had witnessed something more significant than a standard will reading. They had observed the opening moves of a confrontation that would determine the future of the Kellerman family. Bobby's moment had arrived. His enemies had been exposed, their plans had been neutralized, and their escape routes had been eliminated. The trap that he had been constructing for months was finally ready to spring, and the time for mercy or forgiveness had long since passed. Chapter 8. The Confrontation Unleashed. Connor's grip on Bobby's arm was desperate, his young voice cracking with emotion as he spoke words that would haunt the room forever. "Forgive me, Father. Mom made me do it." The teenager's confession shattered the remaining pretense of normalcy, revealing the depth of manipulation that had infected their family. Bobby's response was measured, his voice carrying the controlled intensity of a man who had been expecting this moment for months. "Tell them, Connor. Tell everyone what Trevor asked you to do." The boy's words came in a rush, years of guilt and confusion finally finding release. He described how Trevor had convinced him to copy his father's business files, claiming it was necessary to protect Bobby from unnamed threats. He revealed Trevor's instructions to report on his parents' conversations and routines, always framed as concern for the family's welfare. Diane's attempt to interrupt was immediate and panicked. "Connor, you don't understand." But Bobby's raised hand silenced her with the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Before this charade continues," Diane said, standing abruptly and drawing the attention of everyone in the room, "everyone needs to learn a secret about my husband." Her voice carried a note of desperation, the final gambit of someone with nothing left to lose. Bobby's smile was cold and predatory as he gestured for her to continue. "Please, Diane, share your secret with our friends." Diane's accusation came in a torrent of half-truths and fabricated grievances. Bobby's alleged emotional abuse, his supposed criminal business activities, his claimed threats against her and Connor. Her words were carefully chosen to suggest domestic violence without making specific accusations that could be easily disproven. The room's atmosphere shifted as attendees processed Diane's allegations, but Bobby's calm demeanor and the presence of so many law enforcement professionals created doubt about her credibility. Several of Frank's former colleagues exchanged glances that suggested they found her accusations inconsistent with their knowledge of Bobby's character. Trevor's intervention was calculated and dramatic. He stepped forward from his position near the door, positioning himself as Diane's protector and validator. "I've witnessed Bobby's abuse firsthand," he declared, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had rehearsed these lines extensively. Bobby's laughter was genuine and chilling. "Miguel, would you please play our guests the recordings from Trevor's apartment?" The audio equipment that Bobby had installed in the conference room came to life, filling the space with crystal-clear recordings of Trevor and Diane's most damaging conversations. Their discussions of false domestic violence allegations, their plans to manipulate Connor's college prospects, and their casual willingness to destroy Bobby's business were presented in their own voices. The reaction from the assembled witnesses was immediate and decisive. Frank's law enforcement colleagues recognized the recordings as evidence of conspiracy and extortion, while Bobby's business partners understood the threats to their shared operations. Connor's face crumpled as he heard his mother and coach discussing him as a tool for their manipulation. Diane's second attempt to regain control was desperate and ill-conceived. She began making specific accusations about Bobby's business activities, claiming knowledge of illegal operations and dangerous clients. Her words were designed to suggest that Bobby posed a threat to community safety, requiring immediate intervention. Bobby's response was swift and devastating. He activated a second audio system that played recordings of Diane's conversations with Trevor about gathering information on Bobby's clients and business operations. Her voice clearly revealed that her knowledge came from espionage rather than victimization, destroying her credibility completely. Trevor's mask finally slipped as he realized the scope of Bobby's preparation and the futility of their situation. His facade of concern for Connor and Diane disappeared, replaced by the calculating predator who had orchestrated this entire conspiracy. His threats became direct and personal, revealing the violent tendencies that Bobby had been documenting for months. "You think you've won?" Trevor snarled, his athletic frame coiled with barely restrained aggression. "I know things about your business that could destroy you. Information that certain federal agencies would find very interesting." Bobby's response was delivered with the quiet confidence of someone holding superior cards. "You mean the information you try to steal from my encrypted files? The data that I've been feeding you for months, specifically designed to incriminate anyone who attempts to use it." The revelation that Bobby had been controlling the information Trevor thought he was stealing sent shockwaves through the room. Every document, every client list, every operational detail that Trevor believed gave him leverage over Bobby was actually fabricated evidence that would destroy anyone who attempted to use it against Bobby's business. The chapel doors swinging open at that moment provided perfect dramatic timing for Bobby's final revelation. Two police officers stepped inside, but they weren't responding to an emergency call. They were Frank's former colleagues, invited by Bobby to witness the conclusion of his investigation into threats against his family. Detective Ray Morrison and Sergeant Linda Chun had known Frank Kellerman for decades and had been briefed by Bobby about the evidence he had gathered. Their presence wasn't to arrest anyone immediately, but to provide official documentation of any crimes that might be committed during the confrontation. Trevor's recognition of the officer's true purpose triggered his final desperate gambit. He reached into his jacket, a motion that caused immediate alarm among the law enforcement professionals in the room. His withdrawal of a cell phone rather than a weapon created momentary relief, but his threatened call to federal authorities revealed the depth of his desperation. Bobby's ultimate trap was sprung as Trevor attempted to place his call. The phone number he dialed connected him not to federal authorities, but to Bobby's security firm, where his call was recorded and his threats were documented by professionals who specialized in corporate espionage cases. The realization that even his escape plan had been anticipated and neutralized by Bobby drove Trevor to physical violence. His attack was swift and brutal, the trained athlete using his superior size and strength to try to overwhelm Bobby before the police could intervene. Bobby's response revealed skills that his business associates had suspected but never witnessed. His military training and years of security work had maintained his combat abilities far beyond what his corporate appearance suggested. Trevor's attack was neutralized with efficiency that bordered on casual indifference. Chapter 9: Justice Without Mercy. The aftermath of Trevor's failed assault unfolded with the mechanical precision of a well-orchestrated operation. Detective Morrison and Sergeant Chun secured Trevor while he writhed on the floor, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle from Bobby's defensive response. The crack of breaking bone had silenced the room, followed by Trevor's screams of pain and rage. Bobby's examination of his knuckles was casual, as if breaking a man's arm was merely an inconvenience. "Connor," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he'd used when teaching his son to ride a bicycle. "I want you to understand something very important. This is what happens to people who threaten our family." Connor's eyes were wide with shock, not just from witnessing his father's violence, but from finally seeing the predator that lived beneath Bobby's civilized exterior. The boy's romanticized notions about conflict resolution evaporated as he watched his coach reduced to a sobbing, broken figure on the cathedral floor. Diane's response to Trevor's defeat was revealing in its complete self-interest. Rather than showing concern for her lover's injury, she immediately began distancing herself from their conspiracy. "Bobby, I can explain everything. Trevor manipulated me, made me believe things about you that weren't true." Bobby's laugh contained no warmth or forgiveness. "Diane, you've been recording conversations in our home for months. You copied my business files. You used our son as a spy against his own father. And now you want to claim manipulation?" Miguel Santos had been documenting the entire confrontation with professional-grade video equipment disguised as memorial recording devices. Every word, every action, every reaction was being preserved for legal proceedings that would follow. Bobby's legal team would have irrefutable evidence of everything that had transpired. Dr. Patricia Vaughn, a psychiatrist who had been Frank's friend and who specialized in treating trauma victims, had been observing Connor throughout the confrontation. Her immediate assessment was that the boy was in shock, but would benefit from seeing his tormentors fully defeated rather than partially punished. Bobby's handling of Connor in this moment demonstrated both his love for his son and his understanding of harsh realities. "Son, I know this is difficult, but you need to see how this ends. These people used you, and they need to face consequences that ensure they never threaten our family again." Trevor's medical situation required immediate attention, but Bobby controlled even this aspect of the aftermath. The paramedics who responded were employees of his security firm, trained professionals who would provide necessary care while ensuring that Trevor remained in custody and under surveillance. Diane's final attempt to salvage her situation involved appealing directly to Connor, trying to position herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. Her emotional manipulation was sophisticated, drawing on years of maternal authority and her son's natural reluctance to abandon his mother completely. Connor's response revealed the depth of his disillusionment and the impact of witnessing his father's strength. "Mom, I heard the recordings. I know what you really think about me, about Dad, about our family. You were going to destroy everything for him. Bobby's explanation to Connor was delivered with the clarity and directness of a military briefing. He detailed every aspect of Trevor and Diane's conspiracy, the evidence he had gathered, and the legal consequences they would face. His message was clear. Betrayal carried a price that would be paid in full. The police investigation that followed was thorough but predictable in its conclusions. Trevor faced charges of extortion, conspiracy, assault, and attempted theft of trade secrets. Diane faced conspiracy charges and potential prosecution for her role in the corporate espionage. Connor's testimony would be crucial in establishing the pattern of manipulation that had endangered the family. Bobby's business reputation emerged from the scandal enhanced rather than damaged. His methodical documentation of the threats against his family demonstrated exactly the type of professional competence that his clients valued. Several competitors who had hoped to benefit from Bobby's personal troubles found themselves facing increased scrutiny instead. Trevor's recovery from his broken arm would be complicated by nerve damage that would limit his athletic abilities permanently. His coaching career was finished, his financial situation was hopeless, and his legal troubles would likely result in prison time. Bobby had ensured that Trevor's punishment extended far beyond the immediate consequences of his actions. Diane's future was equally grim. Her nursing license was under review due to the ethical violations involved in her espionage activities. Her divorce proceedings would leave her with minimal assets due to the prenuptial agreement Bobby had insisted upon and her violations of its fidelity clauses. Her relationship with Connor was irreparably damaged by her manipulation of his trust. Connor's adjustment to his new reality was difficult but ultimately healthy. His grandfather's death and his family's destruction forced him to mature rapidly, but Bobby's consistent support and honest communication helped him process the trauma constructively. The boy's understanding of loyalty, trust, and consequences was forever changed by witnessing his father's response to betrayal. Bobby's transformation was complete by the conclusion of the crisis. The man who had once believed in forgiveness and second chances had been replaced by someone who understood that certain betrayals could never be overlooked or forgotten. His willingness to destroy those who threatened his family sent a clear message to anyone who might consider similar actions in the future. The final image of the Kellerman family story was Bobby and Connor walking away from the cathedral together, their bond strengthened by shared knowledge of what happened to those who crossed them. Behind them lay the wreckage of lives destroyed by greed, manipulation, and the fundamental miscalculation of underestimating a man who had never shown mercy to his enemies. Bobby's reputation in both business and personal circles was forever changed by these events. He was no longer seen as simply a successful entrepreneur, but as someone capable of protecting what mattered to him through any means necessary. His enemies had learned too late that forgiveness was a luxury he reserved only for those who proved worthy of his trust. The Kellerman name would carry a different weight in Seattle's business and social communities going forward. Bobby had demonstrated that betrayal carried consequences that extended far beyond immediate punishment, affecting every aspect of the traitors' future lives. His justice was complete, ruthless, and absolutely final.